Alright, so 5 years with my Dyna Lowrider S. It's time for us to do our 5-year review. Let's check it out. Alright, what's going on YouTube? FXDLSBROOKLYN is back in the building, and it's time. Yeah, it's been 5 years. It kind of flew, but we are out here in Margaretville, and what better time than to reflect on the last 5 years with my Dyna Lowrider S. Of course, we got Jenny in the building with some of her high-performance weaving products. What do you think? What's the passenger's quick review on the bike?
She's breaking in nicely.
Breaking in nicely. All right. Huh?
Don't you get hot?
No way. Yeah, we just love to sweat in hot leather. It's the best. Ooh, there's your startup. Ah, yes. Yeah, so 5 years later. So as you can see, the bike still runs great. But let's take it down a little bit so I can talk to you all. I do also have the lady on the back, so there's no reason to get too excited here. But yeah, 5 years goes by fast, and a lot of you all have asked me to make this video because at this point, I know that I'm kind of a rarity out there in the regards of not only having a 2016 Dyna Lowrider S, but being the original owner of that bike as well. That's right, back in 2016 when this bike dropped, I just happened to be in the right place in the right time. I was in the market for a new bike, and once they released this, that was it. And here we are 5 years later. So yeah, 5 years later, this bike is still a very much sought after Harley Davidson. If you look at Craigslist, if you look at Dyna FXR Trader, this bike has not only maintained its value, but has actually gone up in value because they only made it for a year and a half. But yeah, so here we are 5 years later, and I just wanted to give you my current thoughts after putting in 45,000+ miles on this bike, as well as just 5 long and amazing years on this bike. So the first question is it in fact the best bike that Harley Davidson ever made? Now, you all know I would be being quite biased if I stood here and I said, yes, this bike that I'm on right now, best bike that Harley ever made. Obviously that would be biased, so we're not going to say that. But what I will say, as being somebody who is the owner of 3 other bikes, of course this bike, my 1988 FXR, my 2006 FXDB, and then of course the family 1988 Sportster. I'm hopping around between a lot of different bikes quite often, so I feel like I'm in a pretty good place to tell you about this bike in the realm of Harley Davidson models from the 80s up. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say if it's not the best bike that Harley Davidson ever made, then it's definitely within the realm of best bikes that Harley has ever made, for sure. Obviously, this bike has gone through many iterations within the 4 years that I've had it. You know, I ran it stock for a couple months, and then I ran it with a Thunderheader and a Memphis Shades Gauntlet, and then we eventually threw some T-bars and a Road Warrior fairing and ran that setup for a while. Then we threw some bags on there, and then finally we're at the setup that you're on today, which is the FXRT fairing build. So yeah, it's gone through a lot of different iterations, and what I can tell you is in every iteration that I ran this bike, it always performed the way that I needed it to perform. Fresh out of the box, the bike had a 110 Screaming Eagle engine, so speed and engine performance was never an issue out of the box. Bike straight up ripped, still does. Suspension on the bike stock was great. You know, I did 2 pretty long road trips on the bike with stock suspension, and that was my first cross-country trip, and then I did a trip into Canada on the bike, and the suspension was great. I never really went through any of those trips feeling like I needed to immediately upgrade the suspension. But of course, as time goes by, you make little modifications here and there to make your ride a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit more suited to the purpose of your riding style. So if you're a new rider, or you just bought a new Dyna or your new dream bike or whatever it is, you need to look at this bike that you're looking at now and have the realization that this is the progress and work of 5 years. I didn't just get this bike and immediately throw on all these high performance products. There's just no way in regards to my budget that would have ever been possible. So again, this is the build over the course of 5 years. So it takes time. Like, it takes time to, number one, find and get your dream bike, and then number two, dial in your dream bike to suit your riding style 100%. And that's kind of where we're at right now with this bike. So like I said, every iteration of the bike, it always did what I wanted it to do. And you all know my riding style. It's pretty simple. I just want to go fast, and I just want to go far. And even when the only thing I had really changed was the exhaust, the seat, and the bars, it took me cross country and back, and I was very happy. So with that being said, even stock, I really do think that this was one of the best bikes that Harley-Davidson did offer. Especially at the time, there was just a lot of bells and whistles that were thrown on this bike that, when I compare it to my 2006 Street Bob, you know, it didn't have. So for example, not only did this bike come with dual disc brakes, but it also came with ABS. Some of you don't like ABS, some of you do. Me, myself, I am a pretty big fan of ABS. Like, why not have that extra security? It's my only bike that has it, so why not? It's a nice thing to have if you're in a tight situation. Not only that, but kind of one of the big selling points of the bike was it had the 110 Screaming Eagle engine. It had really good suspension. It was the Harley-Davidson Premium Emulsion suspension, which again was solid. It was one of the few models that came completely blacked out at the time, which at the time people were buying street bobs and lowriders and paying all this money and powder coating and whatnot to black out a bike. And this was one that Harley-Davidson offered out of the box with all of that already done. For under $17,000, mind you. That's right. This bike in 2016 when I bought it, it was coming in at under $17,000. This was one of my first major purchases in life, so in terms of my budget, that was perfect for me, right? And then finally, this bike also came with cruise control. If you're touring on a Dyna, a very, very nice thing to have. So we all know that back in 2016, 2017, this was definitely one of the premium Harley-Davidsons being offered in terms of a performance line. Now, the question becomes, in terms of the Dyna line, is it the best Dyna that Harley-Davidson has ever made? A lot of people will argue yes. I do have a lot of friends, though, that are believers in the 2000, 2001, 2002 FXDX or FXD lines that will say, nope, those Dynas were the lightest frame, the most dialed in, those were the best Dynas Harley-Davidson ever made. obviously I can't really comment on that because I haven't put in too many miles on those models, so it's hard for me to say. But if you are someone that has ridden one of those early 2000 FXDXs as well as a Lowrider S, I would like to know which you think is the best Dyna. Is it those early 2000 DXs, or is it in fact the Dyna Lowrider S's? But yeah, so my review is, again, out of all of the bikes that I ride, mainly my FXR and my 06, out of all of them, this is what Peter Gunz would call old reliable. Within the 5 years, in terms of headaches and bike problems, this bike has caused me very, very, very minimal headaches, right? Most of the problems that I've had have been manufactured by myself from upgrades that I did. So some of the notable breakdowns I had was, I had one when I was on my way to Sturgis back in 2017, where I had this crazy oil leak, and that had come from the external oil cooler that I'm running. Let's just take a second and take in the beauty of the Pactin reservoir. Oh my god. Does it feel good to be alive in the summer of 2021? But yeah, so I mean, that was a breakdown that was caused by an upgrade that I did. It was from the hoses on the external oil cooler. I had both fork seals eventually go, which is a common thing that will happen with Dynas after 20,000 plus miles, so that's a normal problem. In terms of that, I really haven't had any issues with this bike. The only other thing that I've had an issue with is the front brake lever. You know, we had to do some work within the master cylinder, also replace that front brake lever after about 40,000 miles, but besides that, this bike has not really caused me any headaches. In terms of being in the shop for maintenance, very little. And I think that goes without saying is a very special thing in terms of reviewing this bike within 5 years. You know, there are bikes that I have that I know when I get on them, there is a chance that something is going to go wrong. But 95% of the time when I'm on this bike, I know that it's going to do what I want it to do. And 99% of the time when I look over the bike after a high mileage day, it's not leaking, there's nothing wrong with it, it's ready to do another 700 miles the next day. And I think that's a very special thing, especially if you're someone that does the long bike trips that I do, that does put in the miles that I try to put down each season. So yeah, reliability on this bike is second to none in terms of any other bike I've ever run. Now, in terms of, you know, like I said, we're past the 5-year mark at this bike, and I said it's pretty much 100% dialed in at this point. Some of you are asking me, is there other things I'm going to do to it? Am I going to do engine work, right? Am I going to do a paint job? Am I happy with the suspension? So these are all questions I can definitely answer right now. So in terms of engine work, right? We all know that we're going to have to rebuild this engine once we hit 100,000 miles. If I keep riding this bike at the same rate that I'm riding it now, then that means that in about 5 years, I'm going to have to rebuild this engine. So basically, the way that I see it is this engine goes as fast as I need it to go. Mind you, that is with SNS 585 cams and with a really good dyno tune. This bike straight up rips. It doesn't have me wanting for power. The only time I get on this bike and I feel like it's slow is when I'm coming off my 06 FXDB, which has a completely rebuilt SNS 116 engine, which anyone who has run an SNS 116 or above knows that you cannot compare that engine to any factory engine. There is just no comparison. That engine is just completely violent, like power like you can't imagine. So yeah, the 06 is just so powerful and rips so hard that when I get back onto this bike, I'm like, damn, it kind of feels slow. But then after I put about 100 miles on it and I get back acclimated to this bike, it's like, nah, this bike does what I need it to do. The power is just fine with the cab upgrade. So in terms of engine work, yeah, I might go up to a 117 on this bike. I might go up to a 120 in 5 years, but there's just no reason to do it now. It would literally just be to tell people, hey, I have a big engine, and I'm not about to throw $40,000 just to tell people that I have a big engine, because I already have it in one of my bikes. It's not necessary. Suspension, if you saw my video where I rode Nick Dyna Navy's FXDB and I was blown away by how good the suspension felt, I am definitely considering transferring to the Legend piggybacks for this bike. But again, the Revo-A's that I've been running on this bike for over 3 years are just fine, right? I got Jenny on the back, as you can see. We forgot to get a little wave for her. But she's super comfortable with the adjustability. The suspension does what I need it to do, whether I'm loading the bike up or whether I'm riding two up or whether I'm doing both, which we did recently. We packed out the Leatherpros with like 40 pounds worth of stuff, and she was on the back, and the bike performed just fine. We weren't bottoming out or anything. So the Revo-A's are still performing good enough, so there's really no rush for me to upgrade that, but it's definitely something that's on my mind. Finally, the last thing, some of you are asking me about a paint job. In regards to a paint job, that's one that I'm kind of still on the fence about. There's this part of me that loves the classic lowrider-esque black with some slight gold accents on it, but there's also a part of me that kind of just wants to celebrate this year that we just went through, that I know for me and I know for a lot of you was probably the hardest year of my entire life. And one way I was thinking about celebrating surviving this crazy year was by blowing this bike up with a crazy paint job. But again, I'm kind of on the fence, because I look at this bike, I just look at this bike sometimes and then I just say, I don't know, there's got to be a good meme out there for how I look at this bike. But I look at it very lovingly. So I don't know, maybe we'll do a paint job. And then finally, in terms of a 5-year review, you know, Jenny on the back, she does high mileage days with me, like for a passenger. You know, we do 300 plus mile days pretty consistently on this bike, and she's comfortable, you know? So the fact that it's a comfortable ride for my passenger as well, you know, that's a big deal, because I ride two up a lot. So yeah, this bike for me over the past 5 years has been amazing. Amazingly reliable, amazingly fun. I've shared so many special moments and so many special accomplishments with this bike that, you know, 45,000 miles in, you kind of have that, like, that soul link, right? Where this bike is definitely an extension to me at this part. I know this bike better than any other bike out there, you know? So, 5-year review, for me, I'm giving this bike a 10 out of 10. Straight up. I very much feel grateful to be the original owner on this bike and know every mile that it's gone through, everything that it's gone through, and I'm definitely never letting it go. Obviously, you all know that. There's just no way I would ever sell this bike. So now that comes to a lot of your other questions, which is, does it make sense to buy this bike used 5 years later? My answer is yes. And the reason why I'm saying that is, again, for a bike that's 5 years old, 45,000 miles is relatively high. And this bike is still ripping just as hard as it ripped the day I got it. So that being said, this particular model, from my experience, 100% lasts. I haven't had anything crazy happen when I started to get up in the high mileage, such as 40,000. You know, these bikes do have a reputation, though, that once you get to, say, 40,000, 50,000, that's when things start going wrong. Which, I don't know. You know, we'll see what happens. Like, when I do hit the true 50,000 mark, maybe that will be the case. And I'll come back to you guys. I'll be saying, yeah, things are starting to go wrong. But right now, sitting at 45,000, nothing has really gone wrong. This bike has been absolutely amazing. Most reliable bike, car, anything that I've ever owned. So if you're someone that's looking to buy one, but you're kind of like sketched out that, you know, every one of them is going to have some miles on it at this point, don't be. You know, these bikes last. These bikes will keep ticking. So don't let that be a deterrent. But what I will say, and I know a lot of you are going to get mad at me for this, the Dyna bros out there that are Dyna till death, is if I were in a situation where something did happen to this bike, where if it got stolen or if it got wrecked, which are two very real possibilities. Like, let's be real, you know, these things happen. But if something ever did happen to this bike, I probably wouldn't be going out there looking for another Dyna Lowrider S. Honestly, I would probably just grab the Softail Lowrider S and call it a day. Because again, I think that they probably made some upgrades on an already amazing bike. Obviously, I'm definitely more of a fan of the twin cam over a Milwaukee 8, but in terms of if I'm gonna lay down like $17,000, I'm gonna lay it down and be the original owner for a Softail Lowrider S, rather than try to recreate my experience with this bike. You know, wave to your fellow bikers. So yeah, but that's just me. Like, if again, I am someone that does own an FXR, and I do own another Dyna. So in terms of the FXR Dyna craze, like, those boxes are kind of checked off for me, regardless if I have this bike or not. So again, if something ever did happen, that would be my backup plan. Would be going with modern technology. And then eventually we're going to be in a situation with those Softail Lowrider S's where we are in right now with this bike, where eventually Harley Davidson's going to stop making them, and then everyone's going to be looking for the Softail FXLRS. It's going to become the same thing, just a repeating pattern again and again and again until the world blows up. But yeah, that is my 5-year review. Let me just say that I make this video with gratitude and PMA and pure happiness. The happiest time, some of the happiest times and most meaningful times of my life have been on this bike. So thank you, Harley Davidson, for creating this bike back in 2016. Thank you for all the companies that have supported me along the way with this build. Thank you for all my influences that have led me to the right direction to be happy with this build 5 years later. Thank you to all my friends and family who have been a part of my riding experience on this bike within the last 5 years. And that could be if you literally just rode with me one time, or if you did a cross-country trip with me. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude right now on this beautiful summer day, and pure joy, which is the best way I could sum up a Dyna Lowrider S after 5 years. So that's it, y'all. 5 years later, 10 out of 10, best decision I ever made in my life. I wish you all the best if you are trying to get into this bike, or if you have this bike, right? But you all let me know. What do you all think? if someone's out there in the market for a new bike and, you know, they're interested in the Dyna Lowrider S, should they scour Craigslist and try to find one of these things for sale? Or should they just go to the dealership and buy the Softail Lowrider S? You all let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching. Stay safe out there and stay low. Shout out to all my Patreon supporters. I could not do this without you. Cheers to you all as we enter a new riding season. Listen to the bad brains. Practice a positive mental attitude at all times. And on that, FXDLSBROOKLYN is out.